And then the last one on the page is blending, and I'm going to use red. And so I'm just going to use red and white. So with the blending, I'm just going to be either pressing down or not using as much pressure to create the light and the dark. So on the cube, I'm going to start with the cube, and remember that there is that reflected light there on the side of the cube. So again, this is going to be my darkest area. So I'm pressing down pretty hard. Not enough to break the point, but I'm pressing down. And then I'm going to start not pressing as much, so sort of letting up the pressure as I get down toward the bottom. Okay, so you see that it goes dark and it's just slightly lighter there. And then the same with the shadow here. I'm going to sort of draw in the shadow or the angle of the shadow first. Again, always darker toward the object, and then it gets lighter as it goes farther away from the object, right? Then I'm going to put in some very, very light area for the rest of this because I want to create a contrast for the rest of the table. And then on this side, I'm going to fill that in and kind of using the same pressure throughout. It's kind of a medium pressure. Remember, I can always go back over it and add in more color or darker if I need it. Like down in this corner right here, we'll see that there's a little bit more of a shadow in that corner. So I'm just going to press down just a little bit harder to make that corner. The top part is going to stay the white of the paper, and then on the background here, again, kind of a medium pressure. It's just so that I create a contrast between here and the table, that there's still a contrast, there's still some shadow over on the other side. I'm going to do the same thing over here, a little bit of shadow on the other side. And then the rest of that's going to be very, very light. Now, you can use the white to go back in, and then you can even use this as a sort of blending technique. You can see that it sort of flattens it out, and if you don't want that texture in there, this sort of blends your... It's going to stay pretty much the same value. It might lighten it up a little bit, but it'll also sort of blend together what you did, just to give it kind of a finished look to it. So you'll see that it pretty much stays the same value, but it also blends those values together. And it helps to sort of give it more of a finished look. I can put some up here on the top area. You'll see that it picked up a little bit of the red, so it has just a slight tint of the red there on the top, all right? So that's blending. So then same thing with the sphere, we want to start by adding in the color, following the direction, following the shape of the object. So again, this is a rounded object. So I'm going like this, like a crescent moon, and adding in the color first. Then I'm coming up here lighter and lighter. Again, I'm not using as much pressure. Lighter and lighter, going around that highlight. And then for the shadow, again, that I'm going to sort of lightly draw it in first. You'll see that the shadow underneath something that's a sphere is kind of this oval or an ellipse that's underneath. And again, here's the darkest part of the shadow here, and then it goes a little bit lighter as it goes farther away. Darkest part right underneath, and then a little bit lighter. And then I'm going to add that just some tint to the table itself. I'm going really light with that so that I create that contrast with the shadow. Then there is part of a shadow back here on the wall, but not as dark as on the object. So again, it's about the amount of pressure that you're putting onto the color pencil. Here, I'm I'm gonna go really, really light over here because that's where the light source is coming from. So super light, like almost not even touching the page, that very, very light, and then just bring in some of that color back here. Very, very lightly. And then going back with my white and adding that in, blending it together. Bring it all together. Notice I'm still following the direction of the shape. So if it's the wall, I'm going vertical. And if it's the sphere, I'm doing these sort of rounded shapes, right? And that's the sphere. Now the next one, the cylinder. I'm going to add the shadows over here. Again, I'm pressing down pretty hard. This is the darkest part. This is the darkest part of the shadow right here. And then I'm going to go lighter and lighter, lighter and lighter. There's this part of the shadow which is lighter than the darkest part, that reflected light. And then the same thing with the cylinder. It's almost an ellipse-shaped shadow that's underneath. Of something rounded, again, darker toward the object. It's like an ellipse underneath. And the table, we can add some color to that, but again, very lightly. I have shadow here on the wall, putting that in dark. And then there's a little bit over here. A little bit above the shape. And then I'm going to go even lighter, much, much lighter for the rest of this. Much, much lighter. And again, you can bring in that color pencil. If you want to, with the cylinder, you can kind of go around the shape like this, following because it'll pull in some of that red into that highlighted area, and even put in some in the highlight. And I'm going to go in here, blend this together so that it's all sort of living in the same world here. It all blends together. So you'll see that this white color pencil doesn't change the value so much as it sort of blends the values together once you're done adding the color. And then the cone here, we're going to put in the darker area. I'm going to go lighter because there's that reflected light, and then a little bit darker again. And the same with the cone. The cone kind of has these ellipse shapes as shadows coming out. Ellipse. And I'll shade in the red very, very lightly, just to bring some of that color in. Then I've got that shadow here on the wall in the background. That's kind of a cone-shaped shadow. And then bring in some color on the wall very, very lightly. Okay, a little bit more shadow over here. And I'm going to bring it very, very lightly. And just a little bit more here on the cone itself. Then I'm going to use my white to blend it all together. Blended it all together. Bring it together. And that is your blending, okay? So in the end, you should have all 4 different techniques done there on your paper.